Committee on Homeland Security, Subcommittee on Oversight and Management Efficiency will come to order. The purpose of this hearing is to examine the areas of duplication at the Department of Homeland Security, identify opportunities for cost savings, and highlight ways the Department can improve its efficiency. And now I recognize myself for an opening statement. We meet today to examine an issue of great importance to the American people: duplication and wasteful spending. While our nation is facing $16 trillion of debt, American families are continuing to see larger portions of their hard-earned paychecks taken out in federal taxes. I believe that the federal government must do more to eliminate duplicative and wasteful programs, so I recently introduced legislation establishing the Committee on the Elimination of Non-Essential Federal Programs. Its sole responsibility is to root out wasteful spending. As the third largest federal agency with a $60 billion budget, the Department of Homeland Security has an important responsibility to the American people for how it uses their hard-earned money. Yet when my constituents see unnecessary duplication of mission or programs that expend valuable resources, a reluctance to learn from best practices within the federal government or the private sector, or an unwillingness to make changes identified in audits as ways to improve, it can be very frustrating. Congressional watchdogs have issued thousands of reports with ways to improve efficiency of DHS and save taxpayer dollars. Earlier this month, the GAO issued a key report related to duplication and cost savings opportunities across the federal government, which found 162 areas within the federal government with fragmented, overlapping, or duplicative spending. Within DHS, this report identified 6 separate DHS components involved in research and development activities. It also found 35 instances among 29 out of 50 R&D contracts where overlap in activities occurred. The price tag for these duplicative contracts was around $66 million. Even more concerning, GAO found that DHS does not have the policies or mechanisms necessary to coordinate or track R&D activities across the department. DHS was created after 9/11 to help prevent the stovepiping of information. If DHS does not have a system in place for basic R&D, how does that lack of communication affect components' operational abilities and DHS's ability to meet its mission successfully to defend the homeland? In 2012, GAO identified 5 more duplicative programs in DHS and 4 opportunities to save cost. In 2011, GAO identified 4 Homeland Security issues where DHS could eliminate duplication and 5 areas for potential cost savings. Yet, out of all these ways to improve efficiency, DHS has only fully addressed recommendations in 2 of these areas. Likewise, the Inspector General has open and unimplemented recommendations identifying over $600 million in questionable costs and about $50 million in funds that could be put to better use. As of last month, the IG had issued 210 recommendations that, if implemented, could result in cost savings of $1.2 billion. The IG has also identified 10 high-priority recommendations which would reduce waste and inefficiency at DHS. To date, DHS has closed 3 of these high-priority recommendations. However, only 1 of these recommendations has been implemented. DHS must take action to implement these recommendations in a timely manner to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the department. Further, while I understand that DHS components have different missions, I believe there may be some overlap in the type of assets and resources used by these components. U.S. Customs and Border Protection, CBP, currently has 2 distinct operational boating law enforcement units, those under CBP's Office of Air Marine, OAM, and Border Patrol agents with maritime qualifications. Also, CBP and the Coast Guard each have their own air and marine assets. Now, Coast Guard is part of the overall Department of Homeland Security. So out of more than 1,000 Coast Guard small boats and 250 CBP boats, only 1 common asset is shared between them, the 33-foot safe boat. CBP and the Coast Guard should consider consolidating these similar resources to use taxpayer dollars more wisely. DHS has pointed to its efficiency review, bottom-up review, and success in public-private partnerships for showing progress in those areas. However, I believe that DHS can do more, starting with learning from the best practices of the private industry. While not every private sector principle is transferable to the federal government, and although incentives may be different, there are many core principles that both companies and the federal government require for success. As a small businessman in South Carolina, I found the same principles of strategic vision combined with strong and capable leadership and smart budgeting to be critical. You don't spend more than you take in or you go bankrupt. Yet the federal government has been slow to learn. In systems management, process management, and organizational culture, the federal government and DHS in particular have a lot to learn. I believe that DHS components should better reach out to the private sector companies with similar processes. For example, TSA's challenges with long lines and safe and satisfied customers are not unique to the TSA. Six Flags, Disney World also face similar challenges. DHS should be thinking about what ways its components can better leverage best practices from the private sector in order to minimize duplication and wasteful spending and instead improve outcomes. In conclusion, these issues highlighted by the GAO and the Inspector General require action from DHS, not words, but action. The private sector possesses many tools that can help DHS implement these recommendations, and I believe that DHS should carefully consider how it can improve in order to steward American tax dollars more efficiently and effectively. I look forward to hearing more from our witnesses today. I appreciate them coming and testifying before us, and the Chair will now recognize the ranking minority member of the subcommittee, the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Barber, for any statement that he may have.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for convening this important hearing, and thank you to the witnesses for being with us today. I look forward to your testimony and the opportunity to raise questions with you. I'm really pleased to see that for the third year now, the GAO, as required by law, has taken a very hard look at federal government programs and provided us with a roadmap for improving efficiency, eliminating waste and duplication, and saving taxpayer dollars. This year's report, as you know, identifies 31 areas that require greater efforts at efficiency, as well as suggestions for providing more effective government services. 3 of these 31 areas relate to the Department of Homeland Security. The report also identifies government duplication, overlap, and fragmentation to help Congress discover more cost savings and revenue enhancement opportunities. The need to reduce spending and examine federal programs to determine where reductions can be made is critical to our efforts to keep the country and move it further along the road to economic recovery. We must get our budget, financial house in order, and this is one important area where we can do that. Last week, along with 19 other members of Congress, I introduced bipartisan legislation to require Congress to address waste and duplication in federal programs across the board. This legislation would require congressional committees to hold hearings, to scrutinize duplicative programs and take actions on these findings before it makes its appropriations recommendations. And that is what we're here to do today, to talk about these important findings from the GAO report and how we can act on a bipartisan basis to find common sense cost savings at DHS. This is not a conversation that we can enter into lightly. We must ensure that the steps we take to cut costs do not compromise the Homeland Security. The threats our nation faces, both man-made and natural, are an unfortunate and all too present reality. As we know, on April 15, 2013, the terrorist attack on the Boston Marathon reminded us that terrorism remains a very real threat to our nation and to the security of the homeland. And Homeland Security professionals must be fully equipped to counter this threat and preserve our security. 2 days after the Boston attack, a fertilizer plant explosion in West Texas claimed the lives of 15 individuals. The memorial services were held yesterday, and countless others were injured. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, and the National Protection and Programs Directorate of the Office of Infrastructure Protection are just 2 of the department's components that have been involved in analyzing and responding to that tragic event. These combined tragedies show us that while duplicative efforts must be identified and eliminated, we must also continue to ensure that our Homeland Security officials have the resources they need to keep our nation safe. Moreover, border security remains a critical national issue. While we've made some progress in our efforts to secure the border on the southern part of our country, there is so much yet left to be done to ensure that my constituents in particular, who work and live along the southwest border, are safe in their homes and on their land. Yes, we've made improvements, but we still have 50% of drugs being seized in my district alone. We cannot allow this to continue. And we cannot afford to lose ground in our border security mission, where some progress has been made. That is why we must ensure that the Border Patrol operates at full capacity and that our agents are given the resources that they must have to do their jobs effectively. Last month, as a result of sequestration, the Department was required to slash every program, project, and activity by 5%. These, in my view, were irresponsible cuts that we simply cannot afford. We must cut the budget, we must reduce the deficit, but there are more prudent ways to do it than the sequestration. The sequester's impact on our Border Patrol agents along the southwestern border is very real. It is also real for the customs inspectors who are helping move legitimate trade into our country and expedite legal passage. The overtime cuts and work furloughs that have been a cumulative impact of slashing our Border Patrol agents' pay by as much as 40% if fully implemented, and it means losing the work hour equivalent of 5,000 agents nationwide. Cutting pay means agents would spend less time monitoring our border, leaving us vulnerable both to terrorism and to cartel activity, and this is absolutely unacceptable. That's why spending across the department must be properly scrutinized to avoid harmful cuts to Border Patrol agents and to customs inspectors, and we must, of course, ensure that the allocation of funds is done effectively. The Department, unfortunately, has not yet put metrics into place to measure and evaluate efforts to secure the southwest border. How can we know what to cut and what programs deserve increased funding if we don't know what's working? When the safety of Americans, and my constituents in particular, is on the line, I refuse to simply guess at what resources make sense. I think we can all agree that we have a lot of work to do, and I look forward to the hearing from the witnesses on how the Department can improve its effectiveness and efficiency, can eliminate duplication, and put its resources to the best use possible. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Barber. And the Chair will now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, a gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Thompson, for a statement.
Thank you, Chairman Duncan, for holding this hearing. I welcome our witnesses also. Given the current fiscal climate, every level of government, federal, state, and local, has joined the effort to eliminate wasteful spending, weed out unnecessary duplication, and cut costs where possible. Eliminating duplicative programs is a common-sense approach to saving scarce federal funds. This approach, however, should be implemented with an eye toward ensuring that reducing programs and activities does not diminish Homeland Security capabilities. Given the broad range of the Department of Homeland Security's mission, including aviation, rail, border security, emergency preparedness, cybersecurity, critical infrastructure protection, and counterterrorism, there may be, in fact, a need for built-in redundancy through such a far-reaching agency. As a result, any effort to reduce duplication and downsizing programs must not result in leaving the United States vulnerable. Yet there is clearly a need to tighten the belt. In many instances, the Department has done just that. Since 2009, through its efficiency review and component initiatives, the Department has identified more than $4 billion in cost avoidances, and its fiscal year 2014 efficiency initiatives are expected to result in an additional $1.3 billion in savings. To aid to the effort to reduce spending, the Government Accountability Office has conducted its annual examination of duplication, overlap, and fragmentation across federal government programs and has released its third report in this series, including recommendations for improvement. In this report, GAO identifies 31 areas where agencies may be able to achieve greater efficiency or effectiveness. Within those 31 areas, GAO also identified 81 actions that the executive branch or Congress should take to reduce fragmentation, overlap, or duplication, as well as other cost savings or revenue enhancement opportunities. Due to its size, mission, and inherent overlapping authority, the Department of Homeland Security is named in more areas of overlap than any other agency. The report contained two areas where fragmentation, overlap, and duplication exist at the department. Number one, research and development, and number two, field-based information sharing. GA also identified checked baggage screening as an area that presented an opportunity for cost savings and revenue enhancement. Hopefully, the department would heed GAO's recommendations. I look forward to hearing from GAO on the department's response. I must note, however, that while GAO makes recommendations in its report for agency action, it also makes recommendations for Congress. Unfortunately, following the last two GAO reports on reducing duplication, the executive branch addressed far more of its recommendations than the steps taken by Congress to fix situations that could only be addressed through legislative action. I look forward, Mr. Chairman, working with you and drafting some bipartisan legislation that perhaps could fix some of those obvious overlaps and duplication. Also, I'd be remiss if I did not address at least one effort to reduce departmental duplication that is once again before Congress seeking approval. This is the department's proposal to consolidate its 16 individually authorized preparedness grant programs into a single pool of money. This ill-conceived proposal causes me grave concern. It was voted down last Congress, and I urge my colleagues to do the same this year. Stakeholders, first responders, and state and local representatives have all spoken against this proposal and stated that such a consolidation would result in hamstrung first responders facing unprecedented natural and man-made disasters. As the world watched, first responders who were on the scene at the Boston Marathon made the difference between lives being saved and a higher death toll. Moreover, in the subsequent search and capture of the surviving perpetrator, local law enforcement, equipped with infrared technology and other Homeland Security apparatus that are often purchased with Homeland Security grant funds, brought a swift end to what could have been a protracted nightmare for Boston area residents. So I look forward to today's testimony, and I thank the witnesses for appearing today, and I yield back my time, Mr. Chair.
I thank the ranking member for participating today, and other members of the subcommittee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. We're pleased to have a very distinguished panel of witnesses before us today on this topic, and I'll begin by introducing the witnesses, and then I'll recognize each one for their testimony. Our first witness today is Ms. Kathleen Barrick, and she's the Managing Director of Homeland Security and Justice Issues at the Government Accountability Office, or GAO. In this position, she oversees GAO's reviews of the Department of Homeland Security and Department of Justice Programs and Operations. Prior to being named Managing Director by Comptroller General Gene Dodaro, she oversaw GAO's reviews of aviation and surface transportation security matters, as well as Department of Homeland Security management issues. Prior to joining GAO, Ms. Barrick held numerous positions at the Department of Defense and the U.S. Postal Service. Our second witness is Mrs. Ann Richards, who is the Assistant Inspector General for the Office of Audits within the Department of Homeland Security's Office of Inspector General, OIG. Prior to joining OIG in 2007, Ms. Richards served in the Department of the Interior, including as the Assistant Inspector General for Audits. Mrs. Richards also held a number of positions with the U.S. Army Audit Agency, and Mrs. Richards is a CPA in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Dr. Paul Stern is the chairman of Claris Capital, LLC, and is a member of the Board of Directors of Business Executives for National Security. Business Executives for National Security is nonpartisan and a nonprofit group that supports U.S. government by applying best business practices solutions to national security problems. Dr. Stern has over 26 years of experience in active operating experience and 7 years of private equity experience.